In the best-case scenario, Russia will run out of money within the next 18 months. Vladimir Putin has been using currency manipulation, data cherry-picking, and the concealment of important economic figures to hide Russia's economic collapse from the West. Putin's rhetoric has been accepted by the mainstream media, but it is a stupid error since behind the scenes, local officials are demonstrating at parliamentary sessions. The truth about Russia's economy has been revealed by our study over the past few weeks, and at the conclusion of this video, we'll specify the precise time when the country's elites might rise up against Putin. Eventually, the world will become aware of Russia's terrifying dilemma. Despite having what could seem to be a solid military position, Russia's economy is crumbling. Western sanctions are causing the entire Russian economy to collapse, according to subtle but startling leaks. Since the demise of the Soviet Union, $600 billion in corporate activity have left Russia, virtually erasing 30 years of foreign investment. For background on how serious this is, consider that Russia's GDP is only $1.4 trillion. Since the Ukraine invasion, over 1,000 enterprises have stopped doing business in Russia, draining about 40% of the nation's gross domestic product, GDP. Using Russian data, Russia claims that 12 to 15% of direct employment has been lost as a result of sanctions. The indirect unemployment rate in Russia is thought to be between 35 and 40%. This is because if 12 to 15% of individuals suddenly lose their jobs, they'll also cease spending on other goods and services because one man's spending is another man's income. According to Russia's own statistics, this raises the unemployment rate to 35 to 40%. By faking economic data, Putin has been misleading the West about the state of the Russian economy. Positive economic evaluations on Russia have proliferated in recent months. Most of them focus on how the country's economy has weathered the effects of sanctions. Yet they all share a fatal weakness in that they all depend on the Russian government. Based on the past few centuries of ruthless dictators, we know it's completely illogical to trust propaganda from a country at war. Putin has been cherry-picking data and concealing important economic statistics from the public. Regardless of what Putin says, the Russian people are aware that their economy is doomed. Citizens would simply vote on a change in economic policy or criticize political incompetence in a democracy. The issue is that free expression is prohibited in Russia. Nearly 13,000 demonstrators were detained after anti-war demonstrations started after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the Russian authorities treated them like animals. As you'll see later in this video, leaving Russia is one of the safer ways to express opposition to it. This is because Russia's economy is doomed. High net worth individuals are emigrating. In 2022, 15,000 millionaires are projected to leave Russia, representing around 15% of the country's overall millionaire population. The next country on the list is China, where 10,000 millionaires have left the country. However, there are over 4 million millionaires in China as opposed to only 100,000 in Russia. The lack of supply in the nation is one of the causes of the wealthy fleeing Russia. Russia's imports are down a startling 60%, which is worrying for a number of reasons. Imports are typically seen as competition for local goods and services, so a decrease in imports would be advantageous for local businesses. However, imports into Russia have decreased so drastically that local businesses no longer have access to the necessary resources to produce their own goods, leading to the non-existence of some products altogether. This is best illustrated by the semiconductor scarcity in Russia, where residents are unable to buy even the most basic items like refrigerators or cars due to the lack of semiconductors. Some claim that Russia and China can conduct trade. Because Chinese businesses are concerned about secondary sanctions, China's actually making the problem worse. Chinese exports to Russia have significantly decreased. Secondary sanctions, which involve cutting off all connections to the sanctioned nation, would mean that the U.S. cut ties with Chinese firms doing business with Russia. Chinese imports from Russia are suffering greatly as a result of these secondary restrictions, which are making Chinese businesses afraid to do business there. A major inflationary crisis results from Russia's import deficit. Even though the Russian currency crisis is terrible, Russia's financial situation is of greater importance. Exports are far more crucial than imports since they enable customers to buy products and allow Russia to continue funding the invasion of Ukraine. Russian energy product sales have seen a considerable drop in demand as a result of Western sanctions on oil and gas. Oil and gas sales account for 40% of Russian GDP. Therefore, this is obviously a major problem for the country's economy. Putin has promoted the false claim that he's selling oil and natural gas to China and India. Let's begin with natural gas first. Because natural gas transportation requires pipelines, selling natural gas is exceedingly challenging to scale. Building a pipeline takes years of planning, setting up, and construction. Putin will contend that he can simply sell LNG that can be carried by water. Once more, this is completely untrue. Less than 10% of Russia's natural gas is liquefied, which means that pipelines must be used to transport the remaining 90% of the country's oil. Since Europe has stopped doing business with Russia, the network of pipelines that deliver natural gas from Russia to Europe is no longer functional. Eastern Siberia and Asia are connected by a separate network of pipelines that are owned by Russia. Compared to Russia's European network, this Siberian network only has 10% of the capacity. New pipelines connecting Russia to East Asia are currently being built, but they'll take years to complete. Additionally, due to Russia's failing economy and inability to sell its natural gas, the nation may no longer be able to support these new pipelines. A large amount of the nation's income has vanished. Nobody wants to give money to Russia because its economy is in freefall. The Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short, was a new project launched in 2013 by the Chinese presidency that replaced the country's previous practice of providing money to Russia. The Belt and Road Program is a strategy to strengthen the economies of the nations that surround China. Russia made up a sizable chunk of the belt. After the West placed sanctions on Russia, BRI spending in Russia decreased to zero, totaling about $932 billion in construction and investment payments since 2013. Russia recently missed a $100 million interest payment on foreign bonds. This is the first default by Russia since 1998. The $100 million interest payment was meant to be paid on May 27th, despite claims by Russian government officials that they had already sent it. The Russian government asserts that it made the payment to the bank known as Euroclear, which distributes payments to investors, but Euroclear has not yet received the funds. Taiwanese bondholders of Russian debt have also complained that they haven't received interest payments. Putin has only used Russia's income and reserves to pay for government spending since the country's credit rating was reduced to a default rating. According to the Russian Ministry of Finance, Russia currently has a 2% budget deficit. This means that it's currently spending 2% more than it's taking in. However, for the purposes of this video, let's assume that Russia is telling the truth. Where does this 2% deficit come from? The Rainy Day Fund is useful in this situation. Budget stabilization funds, commonly referred to as rainy day funds, are emergency money laid aside for unforeseen deficits. As of February 2022, the gold and foreign currency holdings in Russia's rainy day fund were valued at $640 billion. Since then, Russia has spent more than $75 billion from the rainy day fund, leaving only $565 billion. In addition, a sizable portion of the rainy day fund cannot even be used. Russia's emergency fund of $300 billion was deposited in Western banks. Unsurprisingly, the West has frozen all of Russia's bank deposits, thus the country now has only $265 billion in its emergency fund. Russia presently spends $75 billion every 5 months, which indicates that the nation will run out of money in just 17.67 months. In the best-case scenario, spending stays the same because the Russian economy is collapsing. So there it is, the impending economic catastrophe in Russia that will take place during the next 1 to 2 years. Russia has a 40% unemployment rate, residents are fleeing, consumer spending is at an all-time low, inflation is increasing, imports are down 60%, exports are down, the government's out of money, and most alarmingly, Putin's opponents within the Russian elite are plotting a coup. If you'd like to see more videos like this one that reveal the truth about the world economy, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We'll see you in the next video.